My family kicked me out when I got pregnant at 18, but 16 years later, they begged me to attend my niece's wedding. At the reception, the groom's mother said, "Isn't that the girl who got knocked up in high school?" My daughter walked over and said, "Actually, I'm her daughter, Harvard class of 2026. The entire table went silent. If someone had told me 16 years ago that I'd ever set foot in my parents' house again, I would have laughed in their face. But life is strange like that. One moment, you're certain of where you stand, and the next, the past shows up at your doorstep like an old debt that refuses to be forgotten. 16 years ago, my family abandoned me. I was 18, pregnant, and scared out of my mind when my parents, Richard and Diane, told me to pack my bags and leave. I remember the coldness in their eyes, the disappointment dripping from their voices like I had committed the ultimate sin. I begged. I cried. None of it mattered. They had made up their minds. To them, I was a disgrace. To me, they were my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I learned the hard way that some love comes with conditions. I walked out that night with nothing but a duffel bag, a few $100s, and a baby growing inside me. Fast forward to now, 16 years later. Out of nowhere, my younger brother Adrian called me. The moment I saw his name on my screen, I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. "Hey, Sophia," he said, his voice unsure. "It's been a while. A decade and a half qualifies as more than a while, don't you think?" I replied. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. Adrian sighed. "Look, I know things have been complicated, but there's something I need to tell you. I doubt there's anything I need to hear from you. It's about Melissa's wedding." I scoffed, "And that concerns me because—" There was a long pause. Then, hesitantly, Adrian said, "Mom and Dad want you to come." I blinked. I had to check my phone to make sure I was still on the same planet. "Come again. They want you at the wedding," he repeated. There he hesitated. "They've been asking about you." I let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, have they?" After 16 years of radio silence. "Sophia, please," Adrian said, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. "They regret how things went down. They want to make amends." I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Let me guess," I said flatly. "The groom's family is wealthy, and our parents want to pretend we're some big, happy family for the in-laws." "That's about right." Adrian didn't respond. "Yeah," I muttered. "That's what I thought. Sophia, I get it. I do. But this could be a chance to put everything behind us." I closed my eyes, my fingers tightening around the phone. A chance to put everything behind us. How convenient. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. They let me struggle, let me suffer, let me build a life from nothing while they erased me from theirs. And now, because it suited their image, they wanted me back? I should have said no. I should have told Adrian to pass along a message to our parents, that they could go straight to hell. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Fine, I'll come." And just like that, I found myself walking back into the past. The day of the wedding, I pulled up in front of the house I hadn't seen in over a decade. It looked the same. White siding, navy shutters, a pristine lawn. Like time had frozen, like nothing had changed. Except everything had. I took a deep breath and glanced at the passenger seat. "You ready?" I asked. Elena, my 16-year-old daughter, smirked. "I don't know, Mom. Are you?" I let out a short laugh. "Not even close." She gave me a reassuring smile. "We've got this." We stepped out of the car, and as I approached the front door, I hesitated. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I knocked. The door swung open, and there they were. Richard and Diane. My parents. They looked older, more fragile than I remembered. For a second, I thought I saw something in my mother's expression, maybe regret, maybe sadness, but I didn't let myself believe it. "Sophia," she said, her voice oddly soft. "Mom," I replied coolly. Then her gaze landed on Elena. Her eyes widened slightly, as if it had only just occurred to her that she had a granddaughter. Elena gave a polite smile. "Hi. You must be my grandparents." A painful silence stretched between us. My mother forced a smile. "My, you've grown into such a lovely young lady." Elena arched an eyebrow. "Thanks. Though, to be fair, you wouldn't know." I bit back a smirk. That was my girl. The wedding was extravagant, everything my parents loved. Elegant decorations, an expensive venue, guests dressed to the nines. I sat at a table with people I barely knew, pretending like I belonged. But then I heard it. A voice, sharp and cutting, for the next table over. "Isn't that the girl who got knocked up in high school?" The room suddenly felt too quiet. I turned my head slowly. The woman who had spoken sat at a table with other well-dressed guests. Her voice had that familiar, condescending tone, one I had heard too many times in my youth. Catherine Reynolds, the groom's mother. I felt my blood boil. Before I could say a word, Elena stood up. She walked over to Catherine's table, all 16 years of her confidence radiating through the room. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I'm her daughter. Harvard class of 2026. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Catherine blinked, her lips parting like she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. Elena, tilted her head. It's funny, isn't it? She continued, her voice light, almost playful. How do people like to judge when they don't know the full story? Catherine's face flushed red. My parents sat frozen. The entire table avoided eye contact. And I sat back in my chair, sipping my drink as the sweetest kind of silence filled the air. The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. Eyes darted between Catherine Reynolds, my parents, and me, like everyone was waiting to see who would crack first. Elena, my fearless, razor-sharp daughter, stood tall. She wasn't backing down. Catherine opened her mouth, probably to sputter some weak excuse, but the damage was already done. The moment she had spat out her insult, she had sealed her fate. Elena crossed her arms. Would you like to say something else? Or, are we done here? I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Catherine cleared her throat, her eyes flickering around the table as if searching for backup. But no one came to her rescue. Even her own husband looked away, pretending to be fascinated by his wine glass. Then my mother, Diane, did what she always did in uncomfortable situations. She forced a strained, artificial smile and tried to smooth things over. Well, she said with a nervous chuckle, I think we've all had a bit too much wine, haven't we? She reached for Elena's wrist like she could physically usher her back to our table. Sweetheart, why don't we all just sit down and enjoy the evening? Elena took a step back, out of her reach. I'm fine standing, thanks. Mom's smile faltered. Elena, honey, you don't get to call me that, Elena interrupted. Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp. You're strangers to me, both of you. She glanced at my parents. You threw my mom away like she was nothing, and you think I'm supposed to pretend that didn't happen? Dad cleared his throat, his voice gruff. Elena, it's complicated. Families have history. Elena let out a short laugh. Oh, I know. I know all about our family's history. She tilted her head. And from what I've heard, you two weren't exactly parents of the year. The table was dead silent. You could hear the clinking of glasses from across the room, waiters moving between tables, the faint hum of music in the background. But at our table, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I glanced at my mother. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. My father, always the one who prided himself on being in control, had his jaw clenched so tightly, I half expected his teeth to crack. Good, let them feel it. Catherine, desperate to shift the attention away from herself, let out an exaggerated laugh and waved her hand dismissively. Oh, teenagers, she said with an eye roll. Always so dramatic. You'll understand when you're older, dear. Elena turned her gaze to her, expression blank. And what exactly do you think I'll understand? Catherine hesitated. Well, she said, her tone patronizing, that life is complicated, that people make mistakes. Elena smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made grown adults uncomfortable. Funny, my mom was 18, pregnant, scared, and alone, and you think she was the mistake. She shook her head. I think you're the one who doesn't understand. Catherine's face turned an unflattering shade of red. I placed a hand on Elena's arm, a silent way of telling her it was okay. She had said enough. And from the way my mother avoided my gaze, from the way my father stiffened, from the way Catherine looked like she wanted to sink into the floor, Elena had said more than enough. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a blur. People smiled and laughed and danced, but at our table, things never quite recovered. My parents barely spoke to me. Adrian kept his head down, pretending he wasn't witnessing the slow-motion train wreck of our family dynamic. Melissa, the bride, my niece, flashed me a forced smile at one point, but we both knew she was relieved I hadn't made a scene. But I didn't need to make a scene. Elena had done that for me. And honestly, it was better than anything I could have planned. As the night wore on, I caught my mother sneaking glances at me, her face unreadable. Maybe she wanted to say something. Maybe she was regretting all those years of silence. But she said nothing. And so neither did I. As we left the reception, my father finally spoke. Sophia. I turned back. His expression was stiff, his lips pressed into a firm line. We should talk. Elena let out a soft scoff, but I squeezed her hand. I looked at my father, at the man who had once told me I was no longer his daughter. And I waited. I waited to hear what he had to say. But he just stood there. Like always, my father was a man who only spoke when he had control. And right now, he has none. So, instead of answering him, I simply said goodnight. And I walked away. We walked out of that reception hall with our heads held high, but I could still feel their eyes burning into my back. Elena was silent beside me, her hand still loosely clasped in mine. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few guests who lingered outside, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. Like my entire family's carefully curated image hadn't just cracked wide open. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, tried to shake off the weight of the evening. Well, Elena finally said, breaking the silence, that was fun. A small laugh escaped me. Fun? That's the word you're going with. She smirked. I mean, it's not every day I get to see an entire table of rich people go dead silent. I shook my head, unlocking the car. You didn't have to do that, you know. Elena turned to me, her brown eyes serious now. Yes, I did. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Because she was right. She had done what I never could at her age. She had stood up in front of everyone and reminded them that I was more than the mistake they had labeled me as. As we got into the car, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a figure walking toward us. Adrian. I let out a slow breath and rolled down the window. If you're here to convince me to come to brunch tomorrow, save your breath. He exhaled sharply, stuffing his hands in his pockets. You really think I'd be stupid enough to ask that right now? I gave him a pointed look. You called me and asked me to come to this circus, didn't you? Adrian hesitated, then shrugged. Fair point. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked at Elena and gave her a small nod. You've got guts, kid. She smirked. Runs in the family. A flicker of something, regret, sadness, passed over Adrian's face. Yeah, he muttered. I guess it does. He turned back to me. Look, Sophia, I didn't call you just because Mom and Dad wanted me to. He glanced back toward the reception hall. I called you because I thought, maybe it was time. Maybe this family could fix itself. I allowed a dry laugh. And you thought a wedding was the place to do that? Adrian sighed. I don't know. Maybe I was stupid for thinking anything could change. I studied with him. He was still my little brother in some ways. The kid who used to follow me around, begging me to play video games with him before everything went to hell. Did you even try to stand up for me back then? I asked quietly. Adrian flinched. He looked away. No, he admitted. I didn't. I wasn't surprised. I already knew the answer. But hearing him say it still stung. I was 15, he said, his voice strained. I was a kid. And Mom and Dad, they made it clear that if I pushed back, I'd be out too. I clenched my jaw. So you let me go instead. Adrian's shoulders slumped. Yeah, he murmured. I did. I should have been furious. Maybe part of me still was. But the truth was, Adrian had been a scared teenager too. And unlike our parents, he was at least standing here now, trying. You should go back inside, I said finally. Melissa's your niece. Don't let my mess ruin her night. Adrian hesitated. You're not a mess, Sophia. I gave him a tired smile. Tell that to Mom and Dad. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I'll call you. I didn't say whether I'd answer. He turned and walked back toward the building, his head low. As I put the car in reverse, Elena sighed beside me. You okay? I asked. She shrugged. I don't know. I guess I just don't get it. Get what? How can they be like that? She frowned. How do you pretend your own kid doesn't exist for 16 years and then expect everything to be fine? I gripped the wheel a little tighter. I don't know, baby. She leaned her head against the seat. It's pathetic. I glanced at her. Yeah, it is. But pathetic or not, I had spent most of my life aching for their approval, their love. And now, for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it anymore. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I caught one last glimpse of my parents through the grand reception hall windows. My mother, stiff in her chair, swirling a glass of wine she wasn't drinking. My father, stone-faced, nodded along to someone's conversation, but clearly not listening. They looked small, and for the first time, I realized something. I'd spent so many years thinking I was the one missing out on family. But maybe they were the ones missing out on me. The drive home was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Elena had her feet propped up on the dashboard, scrolling through her phone, while I kept my eyes on the road. The highway stretched ahead, dark and nearly empty, the occasional flicker of headlights passing us by. I could still feel the weight of the night pressing on me, like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. My parents, the whispers, the way Catherine had spat out those words like I was still some reckless teenager who had ruined her life, like I was still a mistake. Elena let out a small huff beside me. So, are we going to talk about it? Or are we just going to pretend that dinner didn't turn into a reality show? I snorted. That bad huff. She turned her head toward me, grinning. Mom, that was epic. I mean, I knew they were going to be weird, but I didn't think it'd be that bad. I shook my head. They weren't always like that. Elena rolled her eyes. Yeah, okay. And I bet the dinosaurs weren't always extinct, either. I laughed, despite myself. I guess I just kept hoping they'd change. She shrugged. Maybe they did. Just not in the way you wanted them to. I didn't answer, because honestly, I didn't know if I had an answer. Instead, I just drove. We got home late. Our little two-bedroom apartment wasn't much, just a small place outside of Chicago. But it was ours. The walls were filled with Elena's school awards. My bookshelves overflowed with way too many novels, and our fridge was covered in magnets from every place we'd ever traveled to. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a fancy estate like my parents' house. But it was warm. It was safe. It was home. Elena kicked off her shoes and flopped onto the couch. So what now? I stretched, letting out a tired sigh. Now, I take a hot shower and pretend tonight never happened. She smirked. That's one option. I arched my brow. You have another? She shrugged, but I could tell from the way she was biting back a smile that she had something up her sleeve. I don't know. You could always go full petty and make them regret ever inviting you. I let out a groan. Elena, I'm just saying, she grinned. They spent how many years pretending you don't exist? Now they want you back because it's convenient? And Mom, we both know you could absolutely make them regret that choice. I gave her a look. I raised a menace. She batted her lashes. You raised me well. I shook my head, but I couldn't help but smile. I'd be lying if I said the thought hadn't crossed my mind. After all, my parents had spent years pretending I wasn't good enough for them. But now they needed me. They wanted me back in their perfect little world, as if the past could be erased with one invitation to a wedding. But if they thought I was just going to fall back in line, they had another thing coming. I walked over and pressed a kiss to Elena's forehead. Go to bed, troublemaker. She grinned. Night, Mom. As I headed to my room, I glanced at my phone. One unread message from Adrian. Mom wants to talk. Dad, too, if you're willing. I stared at it for a long time. I could ignore it, block his number, shut them out for good. But instead, I typed back, we'll see. I wasn't going to make this easy for them, and I definitely wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Elena clinking around in the kitchen. She wasn't exactly a morning person, but she always made an exception for weekends. Morning, I mumbled, rubbing my eyes as I walked into the kitchen. Morning, she said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. Sleep okay? I shrugged, as well as I could after last night. She smirked. You mean after I absolutely destroyed that woman in front of a whole wedding reception? I laughed. Yeah, that part was nice. She pulled out a bagel from the toaster and took a bite. So what's the plan? Are we just going to go on with our lives? Or are we making this interesting? I sipped my coffee. Depends. How much fun do you want to have? Her eyes sparkled. Mom, you know I live for this kind of thing. I leaned against the counter, thinking. The truth was, I didn't know my parents anything. But if they wanted me back in their lives, they were going to have to work for it. And if they weren't willing to, well, then they'd have to live with the consequences of throwing me away. A few days later, I agreed to meet my parents for dinner. Not at their house. I wasn't walking back into that place, but at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. The kind of place where they probably had a regular table where the waiters knew their names. Elena came with me. Of course she did. When we arrived, my mother stood up immediately, smoothing down her pristine beige dress. My father looked as stiff as ever, sitting with his hands folded on the table. Adrian gave me a small nod, like he was silently thanking me for showing up. Sophia, my mother said, smiling like we were long-lost friends. It's so good to see you again. I pulled out my chair and sat down, returning her smile with a blank stare. Is it? She faltered slightly, but recovered. We order wine. Your favorite, Pinot Noir. I let out a short laugh. Wow, 16 years later, and you suddenly remember my favorite wine? Impressive. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat. Enough, Sophia, he said gruffly. We asked you here because we want to talk. Talk. I tilted my head. Or control the narrative? Dad's jaw clenched. Elena leaned back in her chair, watching the whole exchange like it was a live performance. I crossed my arms. Go on then. Talk. My mother placed her hands delicately on the table. We made mistakes. We know that. But you have to understand, we were trying to protect you. You were so young, protect me. I interrupted, eyebrows raised. You kicked me out. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. How exactly was that protecting me? My mother flinched. We thought it was best. You were unmarried, pregnant. Best for who? I snapped. Because it sure as hell wasn't best for me. Silence. Elena tapped her nails on the table. I'm just going to say what we're all thinking. She turned to my grandparents. You didn't invite my mom to that wedding because you missed her. You did it because you wanted to save face. And now that you realize we're the ones who don't need you, you're panicking. My mother inhaled sharply. That's not true. It is, I said, cutting her off. You ignored me for 16 years. You missed my college graduation. You missed the birth of your granddaughter. You missed every holiday, every birthday. You made sure I didn't exist. And now that I have a successful career, now that my daughter is thriving, suddenly, I'm worth acknowledging. I shook my head. No, that's not how this works. My father exhaled through his nose. We're still your family, Sophia. No, I said, my voice steady. Elena is my family. The people who were there for me when I had nothing, they're my family. You're just two people who happen to share my DNA. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. For years, I had imagined this conversation. I had imagined them breaking down, begging for forgiveness. I thought I would feel satisfaction, maybe even happiness. But all I felt was free. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I didn't come here for an apology. I came here to tell you that I don't need you anymore. You don't get to come back into my life just because it's convenient for you now. Elena stood too, a proud smirk on her face. My mother wiped her eyes. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I looked at my father, whose expression was unreadable. Then at Adrian, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the table. Then I looked at my mother, the woman who had watched me cry at 18, who had closed the door in my face when I had nowhere else to go. Yeah, I said, I am. And then Elena and I walked out. A week later, I sent them a letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was a list. A list of every milestone they had missed, every moment they had chosen not to be there for. At the bottom, I signed it with 5 words: "You should have loved me then." Then I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and moved on with my life. Because here's the thing about family: it isn't blood that makes you one. It's love. It's presence. It's the people who show up when you have nothing, who choose you even when it's hard. And they had made their choice a long time ago. Now, I have finally made mine.